I said, Chesh. Okay, I'm starting, guys. So I really don't know a whole lot. I don't know much about Bitcoin, really. Just because my son, I'm Ross Ulbricht's mother, it's not genetic. I don't necessarily know about Bitcoin technically. But I do know that why Ross created Silk Road as a parallel system and using Bitcoin as a parallel currency so that people could experience a free market. And it wasn't, he didn't create it to sell drugs. That did happen on Silk Road, but that was not his purpose. I can tell you a little bit about what can happen with the law and Bitcoin because of the Silk Road case. So I mentioned yesterday in my speech that Chuck Schumer, senator from New York, was a big influence on this case. He's also, I believe, the head of the banking committee, the Senate's finance committee at different times. And so he's very involved in the financial world and the political world. And I really don't think the case against Silk Road had to do with drugs. I think it had much more to do with an alternate currency that couldn't be controlled, that was decentralized, and that also, of course, was secret because it was Tor. So there was a privacy element to it as well. So my son Ross, among the convictions, he was sentenced for money laundering. And the defense argued, well, Bitcoin isn't money, so how can you launder it? And the prosecution said, well, it is money. And they said that, they said it's funds. And with money laundering in the United States, a charge for money laundering has to involve funds, another word for money. And this is very important. Definitions in the law are very important, even though the prosecution in this case said, well, we don't have to exactly match definitions. That is against the U.S. Constitution, which says, yes, you do. You have to specifically define what you're charging someone with, which makes sense because if you don't, how can you defend yourself? They can say anything. So it's very important to be specific. And so the prosecution said Bitcoin is funds, but then the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, which is considered the last word on defining money, said no, it's not funds, that Bitcoin is property, and that neither property or barter, trading things, or other means of exchange are funds. If I give you eggs and you give me apples, they're saying that's not money. Also, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, another government agency that talks about money and crime, said that even though sometimes Bitcoin operates like money, operates like currency, it actually isn't really currency, and it doesn't have what they said legal tender status, meaning it's not legally money. It's not money, according to the government. And this was back when Ross was arrested, but only a month ago, in September, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, another government entity, said that Bitcoin is a commodity. It is not money. So the government's having this big argument with itself about what is Bitcoin. And the prosecution, the people who, prosecuted Ross's case, don't want funds defined. They say it doesn't matter. They want everything to be funds. So that example about I trade you eggs for apples, they want to say that's funds, that's money, And if we can arrest you and put you in prison for money laundering, for trading apples and eggs, if we, think you did it illegally, which of course makes many, many more people criminals. They're expanding the law, just doing it. They're just expanding it. It's not through Congress. It's not through any formal way. They're just saying, yeah, we can do that. So Ross's lawyer said, because they don't want anything, they said, we don't want a definition of funds. Anything's funds. So Ross's lawyer said, well, that means any exchangeable property is now funds, and everybody, well, basically expands government power tremendously to prosecute people. And they said in their papers in this case that our laws are expansive and adaptable. This, again, is totally in opposition and against the U.S. Constitution and the Fifth Amendment. Very important. It's in the Bill of Rights that says, no, laws have to be specific. Some prosecutor can't come along and expand the law. That is not how it's supposed to work. That protects us from, having them come up with something that's not even in there. It has to meet the precise description. The description is funds. So what can happen now that Ross has been convicted? First of all, they made sure he was convicted. And one of the ways was they brought their own Bitcoin witness. I talked about this a bit yesterday, who was paid $55,000 at last minute, because they have that kind of money, to come and supposedly explain Bitcoin to the jury. Now, again, I don't understand Bitcoin that well, but Roger Ver is an expert on Bitcoin, and he tweeted, as I showed yesterday, that they either don't understand it or they're lying about it. And we wanted to bring our own Bitcoin witness, Andreas Antonopoulos, to challenge them and to show that what they said doesn't make sense. It's not how Bitcoin works. And the court would not let him testify. This is going to be part of the appeal, that the defense was not allowed to bring witnesses to challenge the government. And the court said, well, the jury understands Bitcoin just fine. We don't need this guy. It's irrelevant and unnecessary. Bitcoin's complicated. Those people have never used it, had never heard of it. I don't believe they understood it at all. So, an example of this money laundering thing as well was the government indicted Federal Express for drug trafficking, but also for money laundering, because people used Federal Express to send drugs, illegal drugs, through one of their trucks. And they indicted Federal Express, said they were responsible, and they laundered money. I guess because the people paid them to send their stuff. So it just shows how they are using money laundering and this whole subject as a way to expand their power and persecute people and potentially arrest them, put them in prison. So basically, that's why this case is important that's one of the many reasons. There's why it's so important. The different factions of the government are saying different things about Bitcoin. And they contradict each other. And yet in the court, they were able to charge and convict and sentence Ross based on money laundering when other parts of the government said it's not even money. And Charlie Shrem, who was also involved in Silk Road, is in prison right now on money laundering. So that's just an example of what is happening in the Bitcoin part of this case. That's all. I'm sure there's other people here who understand Bitcoin a whole lot better than I do as far as how it works.